Can't even get a real job, my sister mocked at Sunday dinner. Monday morning, she's confidently walked into the interview for her dream job, not knowing that I'm sitting at the CEO's desk, her resume in my hand. So tell me why you're qualified? The story really begins on a Sunday. Sunday dinner at our parents' house is a sacred ritual. The table is laden with food, the air is thick with the scent of roasted chicken and fresh-baked bread, and the conversation is, well, it's usually a minefield. That particular Sunday, the conversation was being detonated, slowly and methodically, by my younger sister, Qley. Can't even get a real job, Qley said, smiled the way she does when she thinks a punchline is a public service. I mean, not shading you, Liv, she said, which is what she says right before she shades you. It's just, we're at that age. People are settling into real careers. I'm lucky I have my dream interview tomorrow. She tossed her hair. They've been courting me for weeks. I just took a sip of water, the ice clinking against the glass, and offered a small, non-committal smile. This was our dynamic. It had been for as long as I could remember. I'm Olivia Wells, 29 years old. Qley is 24. We have the same last name, the same parents, but we might as well have been raised on different planets. I've always been the quiet one, the one who found joy in the work itself, not the applause that followed. Qley, on the other hand, was born with a spotlight shining on her, and she spent her entire life trying to stand in its full glare. My dad, bless his heart, tried to diffuse the situation. Now Qley, Olivia is doing very well. She's happy with what she's doing. Qley scoffed, a tiny, dismissive sound. Dad, she's a freelancer. She consults. She works from home in her pajamas. I'm talking about a job with a title, a salary, a corner office with a view, a career path. You know, a real job. She then launched into a monologue about her own accomplishments. My parents' eyes glazed over a bit as she rattled off a string of buzzwords that sounded impressive but were mostly meaningless. My profile is, like, a total game changer. I've been building my personal brand on LinkedIn, networking like crazy, my analytics are off the charts, and my content has been super engaging. I've even managed to create a viral thread about disrupting traditional workflows. It's all about leveraging synergy in a fast-paced ecosystem, you know? The real climax of her Sunday sermon was when she announced her dream job interview. And Monday morning, I'm walking into the interview for my dream job. It's with a tech company, a real industry leader. They're looking for a lead strategist, someone who can innovate and scale. This is it. This is my moment to prove I'm not just playing in the minor leagues anymore. She shot me a smug, sidelong glance. I'm playing with the big boys now. I said nothing. What could I say? Actually, I'm the big boy you're talking about. Sitting at the head of that table? The thought was so absurd, it almost made me laugh. But the truth was, her words still stung. They always did. It was a familiar dull ache. I knew my work was important. I knew I was successful. But Qley's constant need to belittle me had a way of getting under my skin, no matter how much I tried to rise above it. My silence, as always, was interpreted as a concession. She took it as a sign of my defeat, a silent admission that her path was the superior one. She reveled in it, her face glowing with a mixture of pride and a strange, deep-seated insecurity that she always tried to hide with braggadocio. Thinking back, that insecurity was always there. It's a habit I picked up early in life, a silent observation I made about my sister. I've always been 5 years older, and I always had a head start. In school, she was always trying to measure up to my grades, my awards, my little victories. The thing is, I never saw them as victories to be flaunted. I was happy with my achievements, but I didn't feel the need to shout them from the rooftops. I just did my work, got my A's, won the science fairs. But Qley, she had to be the best. When she won the third-place ribbon in the county art show, she would frame it in the most elaborate way possible and tell anyone who would listen how she was on the cusp of artistic greatness. What she didn't know was that I had won first place in the same show, a few years prior, for a small, unassuming charcoal sketch of a bridge, and I had simply put the ribbon in a drawer and moved on. This pattern repeated itself throughout our lives. She would publicly celebrate her achievements, and I would quietly achieve mine, letting her bask in the glow of the attention. Her need to publicly assert her superiority was, in my mind, a way to compensate for her fear that she wasn't actually as good as she pretended to be. So I let her have her moment. I always did. It was easier than trying to compete with someone who was already competing against a ghost. This time, though, it felt different. The stakes were higher. A dream job wasn't a school ribbon. It was a person's career, their future. And her casual dismissal of my entire life's work felt like a slap in the face. I told myself to let it go, to be the bigger person, as I always had. But the feeling of being misunderstood, of being made to feel small, lingered long after the dessert plates were cleared and the front door closed behind me. I knew that Monday was going to be a long day. I just had no idea how long it would be. Monday morning dawned bright and early. I was up before the sun, as I always am, my routine a familiar and comforting series of actions. I brewed my coffee, read the morning briefings, and then headed to the office. The drive was a quiet, meditative time, the city slowly waking up around me. I pulled into the underground garage, took the private elevator to the top floor, and stepped into my domain. The C-suite floor was a study in minimalist elegance. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the city, and the silence was only broken by the hushed whispers of assistants and the gentle hum of the building's HVAC system. I walked past the reception desk, exchanging a brief, professional nod with my assistant, and headed straight for my office. The corner office. The one with the best view. The one Qley had so vividly described the night before. I sat down at my desk, the massive mahogany surface a testament to the weight of the decisions made on it. A pile of folders awaited me, all marked for review. They were the usual mix: quarterly reports, budget proposals, and a thick stack of resumes for the lead strategist position. As I began to sort through them, my hand froze. My heart skipped a beat. The name on the top resume was one I knew better than my own: Qley Wells. For a moment I just stared at it, the letters swimming before my eyes. The universe, in its infinite wisdom, had a truly twisted sense of humor. The dream job she had bragged about, the one she had used to mock my entire life, was at my company. The company that I, Olivia Wells, ran as CEO. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. A wave of emotions hit me all at once. The first was a shock, a profound sense of disbelief. The second was a surge of righteous indignation, the memory of her condescending tone still fresh in my mind. Not a real job, she had said. A career path. I had a career path, all right. I had built the goddamn path. My fingers tightened around the resume, the paper crinkling slightly. I felt a conflict raging inside me, a war between the professional and the personal. The CEO side of me, the one that had built this company from a scrappy startup to a multi-billion-dollar enterprise, knew what was at stake. The sister side of me, the one who had felt the sting of 1,000 tiny insults over the years, felt a different kind of pull. My thoughts were a torrent of justifications and counter-arguments. Why did I keep my identity a secret from my family? It wasn't a secret, per se. Just something I never felt the need to broadcast. My parents knew I worked in tech, that I had been successful. But they never asked for the specifics, and I never offered them. I liked the anonymity, the ability to come home and just be Olivia, not the CEO. It allowed me to exist outside the corporate bubble, to keep my life grounded. More importantly, I had a deep-seated fear of being accused of nepotism. This company, this success was something I had earned, clawed for, bled for. I didn't want anyone to think I had gotten a leg up because of my name or family connections, even though those connections were non-existent in the corporate world. The company was also in a sensitive phase, with a lot of pressure from investors. Any hint of scandal or unprofessionalism could send ripples through the entire organization, and I simply couldn't risk it. I took a deep breath, pushing the personal feelings down, locking them away in a mental box. This was a professional situation, and it needed to be handled professionally. I picked up my office phone and buzzed my assistant. Priya, can you come in for a moment? Priya Patel, our head of HR, was the definition of by the book. She was a woman who lived and breathed process, a human rubric. She came into my office, a neutral expression on her face, holding a notepad. The lead strategist interviews are starting this morning, correct? I asked, my voice calm and even. Yes, Olivia. The first candidate is scheduled to arrive in about 20 minutes. I gestured to the stack of resumes, and then to Qley's on top. I need you to ensure this process is handled with absolute fairness and transparency. The rubric we developed? It needs to be followed to the letter. Every single question must be asked. Every single answer must be recorded. We need to have a detailed rubric score and interview minutes for every single candidate. No exceptions. Priya's eyes flickered to the resume in my hand, then back to my face. But she didn't say a word. She just nodded, her face impassive. She understood. I also want you to know, I continued, my voice low and serious, that the first candidate is my sister, Qley Wells. I will be joining the panel, but if at any point you feel that my presence compromises the integrity of the process, I will recuse myself immediately. Your job is to ensure this is done by the book, without any perceived favoritism. Priya's expression didn't change, but her eyes held a new flicker of understanding. She had been with the company since the early days, and she knew me well enough to understand the gravity of what I was saying. This wasn't about being nice. This was about being fair. And more than that, it was about protecting the company's integrity, even from my own family. Understood, Olivia, she said, her voice crisp and professional. I'll ensure the process is flawless. The panel is ready. I nodded, the knot in my stomach tightening. It was done. The process was locked. There was no going back now. My decision was made, and it was to be the professional I had spent my life becoming, not the emotional sister who had been hurt the night before. The meeting room was a sleek, glass-walled box, minimalist in its design. The interview panel was already seated when I walked in. Marcus, our CTO, a brilliant but blunt engineer with zero tolerance for corporate nonsense. Elena, our lead designer, a woman with an uncanny ability to read a person's true intentions just by their body language. And Priya, of course, the ever-vigilant gatekeeper of HR. I took my seat at the head of the long table. The tension in the room was palpable, a silent hum of anticipation. We reviewed the rubric one last time, our faces illuminated by the screens of our laptops. A knock came at the door, and Priya went to answer it. She opened the door, and the first candidate, the one whose resume I had held in my hand just moments ago, stepped into the room. Qley Wells, my sister. She was dressed impeccably, in a power suit that looked both stylish and professional. Her hair was perfectly styled, and she held a leather portfolio, her expression a mask of practiced confidence. She scanned the room, her eyes flicking from Marcus to Elena to me, and then she froze. The mask of confidence shattered. Her eyes, wide with shock, locked onto mine. Her mouth, which had been curved into a winning smile, fell open slightly. The color drained from her face. She looked like she had just seen a ghost, and in a way, she had. The ghost of her older sister, the one who, quote, didn't have a real job, was sitting at the head of a table of industry leaders, ready to interview her for the opportunity of a lifetime. I didn't smile. I didn't frown. I just held her gaze, a calm, steady presence in the eye of her personal storm. She stood there, frozen in the doorway, for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Priya, ever the professional, gestured to the empty chair. Please, have a seat, Ms. Wells. Qley moved as if in a daze, her movements stiff and jerky. She sat down, her portfolio clattering onto the table. Her eyes never left mine. The confident, articulate woman from Sunday dinner was gone, replaced by a nervous, bewildered girl. I picked up her resume from the table, a crisp, white sheet of paper that suddenly felt impossibly heavy. I glanced down at it for a moment, then looked up, my gaze locking onto hers. The silence in the room was deafening. The other panelists watched the exchange with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. And then I delivered the line. The line that had been forming in my mind since Sunday dinner. The line that was both a question and a quiet, devastating statement. So, I said, my voice as calm and steady as a still lake. Tell me why you're qualified for this position, given your views on what constitutes a real job, of course. The silence that followed was absolute. Qley's face paled further. She opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She stuttered, stammered, and looked away, a flurry of disjointed thoughts and anxieties playing out on her face. Her perfectly rehearsed answers, the ones she had been practicing for weeks, had been rendered completely useless. Her confidence had been a carefully constructed facade, and I had, with a single question, torn it all down. The rest of the interview was a slow-motion car crash. She tried to recover, but her answers were a mess. She used all the buzzwords she had practiced, but they lacked substance, lacking the depth of experience, or a real-world example to back them up. She spoke in vague generalities, offering a lot of flash, but no real fire. The other panelists took over after my opening. Marcus, the blunt CTO, was merciless. Your resume talks a lot about synergy and disrupting workflows. Can you give me a specific example of a project where you successfully implemented these concepts and what the measurable ROI was? Qley fumbled, offering a flimsy, hypothetical example that showed she had a theoretical understanding but no actual hands-on experience. Elena, the designer, then chimed in with her own kind of insightful probing. Your profile mentions you're a quiet leader and a team player, Elena said, her tone deceptively soft. Tell me about a time you had to deal with a difficult coworker or a team member who was not pulling their weight. How did you handle the situation, and what was the outcome? This was the question I had wanted to ask myself, the one about attitude and company culture. Qley, who had a track record of being competitive to a fault, offered a sterile corporate speak answer about aligning goals and open communication that rang completely hollow. Elena just nodded, her expression unreadable, but I could see in her eyes that she had made her own silent judgment. I only asked one more question, near the end of the interview. Qley, I said, leaning forward slightly, this company prides itself on a culture of mutual respect, where we value every team member's contribution, regardless of their role or title. We believe that a positive attitude and a collaborative spirit are just as important as technical skills. How do you feel your past experiences and perspective align with that kind of corporate culture? She tried to pivot, talking about her eagerness to learn and her respect for hierarchy, but her words sounded like a desperate attempt to cover her own tracks. I just sat there, listening, watching the final echoes of her confidence fade away. The rest of the interview was a blur. When it was over, she stood up, gathered her things, and left the room. Her shoulders slumped, her triumphant swagger from the night before a distant memory. The panel debrief was swift and brutal. Marcus, the CTO, didn't mince words. Her technical skills are entry-level at best. The buzzwords are just that, buzzwords. She has no tangible experience in a real-world setting, not qualified. Elena, the designer, was more empathetic but no less firm. Her attitude is a major red flag. She presents a front of confidence, but it feels like arrogance. I don't see her as a collaborative spirit. The culture fit is just not there. Priya, the HR head, simply presented the rubric scores. Based on the objective criteria, she did not meet the minimum requirements for this position, lacked specific examples, failed to demonstrate a foundational understanding of the role's responsibilities, and her behavioral responses were evasive. The decision, in a strange way, had been taken out of my hands. It wasn't my personal feelings that were denying her this job. It was the collective judgment of my leadership team, based on an objective and fair process that I had personally demanded. My internal battle was over. The choice was made. I had chosen professionalism. I had chosen the integrity of my company over the opportunity for personal retribution. The email went out from Priya's office the next day. A polite, carefully worded rejection letter, thanking her for her time and wishing her the best in her future endeavors. I didn't see the email, but I knew what it said. I had approved the template months ago. I didn't know what would happen next, but I braced myself for the storm. And the storm, as predicted, hit. The first sign was a series of frantic text messages from my mom. What happened with Kayla's interview? She's so upset. And did you say something to her? She said you were mean. And finally, did you really tell your sister she wasn't good enough for her dream job? I took a deep breath. This was it. The moment I had been dreading. The family drama. I didn't respond to the texts. Instead, I sent an email to both my parents and CC'd my sister. It was a formal, professional email. Not a text, not a phone call, an email. Subject, Kayla's interview. Dear Mom and Dad, I'm sorry to hear that Qley is upset. I want to be clear about the interview process. As the CEO of the company, I am involved in all senior-level hiring decisions, and I was part of the interview panel, which included our Chief Technology Officer and lead designer. To ensure a fair and unbiased process, I made it a point to implement a strict, objective rubric for all candidates, as well as a policy to record all interview minutes. I have attached a copy of the company's hiring policy, the rubric that was used, and a summary of the panel's interview minutes and scores. As you will see, the decision to not move forward with Qley was a collective one, based on her qualifications and her performance against the set criteria. It had nothing to do with personal feelings and everything to do with her fit for the role and the company's culture. I hope this clarifies the situation. As I've always said, I'm a firm believer in keeping my work and family separate, and I will continue to do so. Best, Olivia. The email was a mic drop. It was a document dump. It was irrefutable. I had not sabotaged her. I had not played favorites. The proof was in the pudding, and the pudding was a stack of professional documents that showed her failure was entirely her own doing. The phone calls and texts from my parents stopped immediately. A fragile peace, a temporary one at least, descended upon the family. But the quiet didn't last. The social media fallout was next. Qley's social media presence was her entire world. It was where she curated her perfect life, where she broadcasted her triumphs. So it was no surprise that she took to her platforms to express her perceived injustice. Her first post was a vague, dramatic status update. Some people just can't stand to see you succeed. The people closest to you are often the ones who will stab you in the back the fastest. She followed it up with a cryptic, angsty-looking selfie with the caption, "When the glass ceiling shatters you instead of you shattering it." The comment section was, as you can imagine, a cesspool of uninformed sympathy and outrage. Her friends and followers, having no idea about the context, were quick to offer their condolences and send angry emojis. It was a classic woe is me performance, designed to garner sympathy and make me look like the villain. But then, a funny thing started to happen. This story began to change. Someone from her last internship, a former coworker, commented on her post. "Wait, this is about the tech company, isn't it? I heard you were late for every single deadline on that last project. I'm not surprised they passed on you." Another former colleague chimed in. "Seriously. She was the one who was always networking instead of actually working. The rest of us had to pick up the slack." The comments began to snowball. People from her past, people who had a first-hand experience of her work ethic and her arrogant attitude, started to come out of the woodwork. The narrative of victim began to crumble, replaced by a much more accurate picture of a young woman with a lot of ambition and very little substance. I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth was out there, and it was telling its own story. The final scene of this whole saga happened a few days later. I was in my office, lost in a sea of spreadsheets and projections, when my office phone rang. It was Priya. "Olivia, I just got off the phone with Qley," she said, her voice a low, confidential tone. "I've been a little concerned about her mental health after all this. I just wanted to reach out to clarify a few things." My heart ached for a moment. This was the Priya I knew, the one who cared not just about the rules, but about the people behind them. "She was pretty emotional," Priya continued. I was able to explain to her, in detail, why she didn't get the job. I went over the rubric again, highlighted where she fell short, and pointed out the specific feedback from Marcus and Elena. I wanted her to understand that this was a collective decision, based on merit, not on any personal intervention from you. That was the key. Priya had held the line, protecting both me and the integrity of the process. She made it clear that my hands were clean, that the scorecard was the only thing that mattered. Later that day, my phone rang again. This time, it was my sister. "Olivia," she said, her voice small and hesitant. The arrogance was gone. The bravado had vanished. "Hi, Qley," I said, my voice gentle but firm. I'm sorry," she said, the words barely a whisper. "I'm sorry for what I said at dinner. I was stupid. I had no idea." The apology was a moment of truth, a crack in the armor she had worn for so long. It was the apology I had been waiting for my entire life. "I accept your apology, Qley," I said, "and I'm glad you reached out." There was a moment of silence, and then she spoke again, a faint trace of her old self beginning to resurface. "Listen, since you're in such a high position, maybe you could, I don't know, put in a good word for me at another company, or maybe a different role there." And in that moment, I knew she hadn't truly changed. She was still looking for the easy way out, the shortcut. "Qley," I said, my voice firm, "family is family. A scorecard is a scorecard." I paused for a moment, letting the words sink in. "Look," I continued, a hint of softness returning to my voice, "I can't give you a job. It wouldn't be fair to you, and it wouldn't be fair to the company. But I can connect you with some amazing mentors I know. I can recommend some excellent online courses that will help you build your portfolio and give you the real-world experience you need. I can help you, but you have to do the work. The rest is up to you." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. I didn't know what she was thinking. I didn't know if she would accept the help, or if she would just hang up the phone. But in that moment, I knew I had done the right thing. I had given her a chance, not to get a job, but to actually earn one. I had set the boundary I should have set years ago. And I had finally proven, to both of us, that my not a real job was a life built on integrity and hard work. And that, in the end, was the only scorecard that truly mattered. Epilogue. Priya, ever the keeper of rules and human hearts, told me something that stayed with me. "If you wanted to play favorites, you wouldn't have left the room. You would have gone with your heart. But you chose to be fair." And she was right. I had a choice, and I had made it. I had chosen to be a fair, professional leader, not a vengeful sister. The victory wasn't in denying her a job, but in denying myself the opportunity for revenge. It was in choosing to be the bigger person, and in doing so, I had finally found my peace.